15 minutes past the hour. Thank you so much for joining us on NTV. Good morning, and great to have you join us this, cold morning on this special edition of Top in Business. I know it doesn't sound like my kind of thing, but hey, it is the 5th day of December and we mean business. Just 26 days remaining until the end of the year. Christmas is knocking and so is 2019. It also happens to be International Volunteer Day, a unique time for volunteers and organizations to celebrate their efforts to share their values and promote their work among their communities. And the focus is how the diverse and dynamic role of volunteerism is promoting the Sustainable Development Goals. This, of course, is in line with why we are here in Naivasha. We have a multi-stakeholder engagement for the implementation of the SDGs in Kenya, and we have participants from various organizations and institutions represented here. We will get down to know who they are in a minute, but a quick look at where we are coming from before I introduce my panel. In 2015, 193 world leaders agreed to a series of 17 ambitious goals. Their aim was to end poverty, fight inequality, and stop climate change by the year 2030. Now, remarkable successes have been accomplished, but there is much work to be done. And for the next 1 hour, we are going to have a conversation around this. My name is Dennis Okari, and I have the pleasure to introduce my distinguished panel here with me. And I'll start off with the Principal Secretary, State Department for Planning, Dr. Julius Muya. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. And we also have from the Parliamentary SDGs and Business Caucus, Honorable Esther Passaris, who's also the Nairobi County Women Representative. And thank you so much for joining us as well. And we have a professor in the house, academia, Professor Gituro Inaina from the University of Nairobi is going to share his thoughts, his intellectual ideas on this discussion. Thank you so much for joining us. We have from the civil society, we have Ms. Florence Sievuo. Sievuo, I guess I got it correct? Sievuo, I will learn it with time. So we have Florence with us from the SDGs Kenya Forum. Thank you so much for joining us. And last but not least, at the other end of the stage, we have Mr. Stephen Wainaina from the UN Global Combat Kenya, who's from the private sector, representing the private sectors. Thank you so much for joining us as well.
Thank you for having me.
How are you guys doing this morning? You had a great conversation from 8:30 in the morning. We're just picking up from where that conversation was last left, and we're going to continue this across the day. But we are live on NTV, and the issue of SDGs, there's discussion around it, sometimes can sound very elitist, but to break it down so that the ordinary Mwananchi can understand why we are here, why is this so important to have all these stakeholders and everybody, especially on this panel, included in this discussion? I'll start with you, Bona P.S.
Well, thank you, Dennis. And really, I mean, thinking about the Sustainable Development Goals, because SDGs, sometimes people forget it is Sustainable Development Goals. For us in Kenya, it is important to talk. And to talk so that we can come up with an engagement framework which will help Kenya to deliver on the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. Because if we operate in silos, where the government operates on its own, then the private sector thinks on their own, then the civil society on their own, and development partners on their own, we will not be able to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. So this 1.5 days workshop is actually a way of looking at even Sustainable Development Goal number 17 on partnership. So us getting together and saying, let us talk together and come up with an engagement framework to deliver Sustainable Development Goals in Kenya as one nation.
Honorable Esther Passaris, you're sitting next to the government. Do you share the same sentiments as Dr. Julius?
I mean, for me, the Sustainable Development Goals, we have to understand where they came from. I mean, we started off with the Millennium Development Goals, and by 2015, we hadn't achieved them. So those were 8 goals, and then they came up with the Sustainable Development Goals. Now, Sustainable Development Goals, the beauty about them is that it involved a lot more countries. It was a lot more, the thought process was massive. And I think the most important thing is Kenya had the advantage of actually being there to spearhead, from Millennium Development Goals to Sustainable Development Goals. But the 3 things that I want Kenyans to understand as they're watching this is it's about the planet, it's about people, and it's about prosperity. So if we get this right, we think about our planet, we think about the people and how we involve them, in saving our planet, and then we think about how we involve the people in becoming prosperous, because that's what the whole essence of living is about. It's about saving our planet for the next generation. It's about getting involved and bringing us together, and it's also about prosperity, because everybody wants to live well, and that's why the main slogan for the Sustainable Development Goals is leave no one behind. We want to move as one, and it's about poverty. Just let's deal with poverty and all the other problems that are around poverty. Then really, if we tackle them right, then we will actually have a world that is prosperous and in moving forward
in
the same way.
direction.
Yeah.
Wow, professor, the only professor on the stage. I mean, do you think there's an added value of having these multi-stakeholders structure in implementing these sustainable development goals?
Let me perhaps step back a bit, and thanks for having me here, and explain what is sustainable development goals. And I'm going to talk to the Mwananchi in Murang'a County. When Mwangweria came in, he bought a Hakaupa family. He was looking for something which will bring development within the people. So the word development comes in. He's looking for something sustainable. It's not just today you have this cow, tomorrow it's not there. And this goes, there's a focus. What's the focus? Is to create wealth within my people. So the SDG to me hits the last mile, hits the Mwananchi. If you look at it from that perspective of Murang'a, go to another country like Turkana, go to another country like Taveta. And I think that's what the SDGs are all about. It's making our people create wealth, and it's sustainable, because one of the biggest challenges we have in this country, we start something, we drop it. So I think that to me need to become very clear.
Okay.
Now the second thing I think to ask Dennis, it is important to appreciate when the community looks at development, they don't see Julius, they don't see George, they see comprehensive. And therefore, this engagement is so important. So we are not seen in silos by the community. At times, they see us confused. So we are actually moving together. Even in Nairobi, where my sister comes from, how do we move together? As government, as civil society, churches, everybody to address that.
Well, you're talking about engagement, and I'll throw this to Ms. Florence. I mean, in your opinion, do you see the value of having everyone involved? Because globally, this is the conversation that is going on. But you have government, you have parliament, you have the private sector represented, you have the academicians also involved. Do you see any value in having all these people together in the same room?
Thanks, Dennis, and I think that's a very good question, and that's why we're here today. The issue is that for a very long time, development has been from a silo perspective. We've had the government working by itself. We've had all the different sectors championing development from their own perspective. But this time around, we are saying with the Sustainable Development Goals, we have a chance for all of us to come together. And coming together means from a bottom-up approach, starting from the Mwananchi. And that's what you're asking us. How do we ensure that that Mama Mboga, that Wanjiko, can understand what it means to have water each and every day, to have access to health, to have access to education, and so forth. And so today, as we meet here as the multi-stakeholder forum, we believe that this is the beginning for Kenya to deliver as one, and also for us as different stakeholders to have issues of coordinated approach. Coordination means we all understand from the different perspectives the Inter-Alia principle, for example, that talks about common but different responsibility. We are all having a common agenda, but we have different responsibilities. How can the government spearhead this? How do we support that from civil society? How do we ensure citizens understand that SDGs are not a foreign subject? We're talking about what our first president talked about, ugonjwa, umasikini, issues of illiteracy and so forth. So that's the conversation here today, and the value is so huge that we cannot miss it as Kenya. Thank you.
Well, Stephen, you're from the private sector, and from the private sector, there's a whole lot of dependence on the weight you bring into conversations like this one. Do you feel like you carry the necessary weight into this kind of conversation, and what do you think is your value or your contribution towards this?
Well, thank you. It's very simple, really, for business, and I'll break it down for the common one. I keep referring to Mama Mboga. By the way, my mom is Mama Mboga. So, this is for her. For business, it's simple. Business is perhaps the most ubiquitous sector in all society. Where we live is someone's business. How we go to school, how we go to work, where we go to the hospital. All these are someone's business. And business being so central to human progress, human development, what we are referring here as sustainable development, it is obvious, it is apparent that business is central to the sustainable development goals. Now, the reverse is also true, that SDGs are also central to business growth. Every single goal is attempting to address a situation, a problem that is already a systemic barrier for business. And therefore, we have two things that are true at once. One, that business is central to SDGs, and SDGs are central to business. And yet, business cannot set laws. We rely on the legislature for that. Business cannot do research. We rely on academia for that, and so on and so forth. So it is crucial to bring everyone on board, a variety of actors, each with a fundamental interest to the success of SDGs, each bringing their own strengths, each bringing their own technical expertise, and most importantly, a collaborative advantage rather than a competitive one that creates real value that is greater than the sum of its parts.
I'm going to throw this back to Dr. Julius Bonapies. I mean, the government normally comes up with these very complex structures when it comes into looking into issues of development and how to break these SDGs down to simplified form so that the common mwananchi, the mamambogas we're referring to here, gets to not only understand but benefit. Then my question is, from the government perspective, because you have all the stakeholders here on stage and many who are also not here, how has the government been engaging with these stakeholders in ensuring that the implementation is not only effective but timely, because we're constrained also with time? How has it worked as government?
Well, that is a very, very good question, actually, because the way that the government operates is within a very clear framework. But let me start from the point of view that at the point of developing the Sustainable Development Goals, we did appreciate that these have to be informing our development planning frameworks in the country. And so, for starters, I want to say the big document that we have recently developed, I mean, through a very consultative process, and this is the Medium-Term Plan 3, which is defining the development agenda for the country from 2018 to 2022. We have looked at the Sustainable Development Goals and borrowed that which we can implement and put into the medium-term plan. So for our country, as we are going forward, we can be sure that we have not packed the Sustainable Development Goals somewhere as a strange document to be implemented on its own, but we have mainstreamed it into our big planning document, the Medium-Term Plan 3. At the same time, that has also informed the Big Four agenda that the government is implementing at the moment. And also, let me say specifically, the blue economy, and a lot of you might be aware about the conference that we held recently. That is one of the goals in the Sustainable Development Goals. So for us in government, we look to ask ourselves, how can we make sure that those big global development frameworks, how can we make them smaller and infuse them into our planning documentation? So that's the first step. The second step is to engage with stakeholders like we are doing now and ask ourselves, how can we break this big document into something that people can understand? And I want to commend you, members of the media, and thank you, Dennis, for being here, because you are the ones then who will take this message in a language that everybody will understand through your different types of engagement. And then we are using all these other stakeholders whom we are with, and also the academia here, professor here. When he goes to teach in class next time, he might set an assignment on sustainable development goals to his students. And so we are looking for every facet of society, and that is why we have got this multi-stakeholder framework of engagement to make sure that we reach as many corners of the society as possible. Of course, previously we had set up an inter-agency framework where we have a committee that is looking at the Sustainable Development Goals. And what I am looking forward to as we engage today is to come up with better, robust frameworks in which to reduce the Sustainable Development Goals into a language that, as one is looking after his cattle and goats, he knows what Sustainable Development Goal he is implementing as he's looking after his cows, and so on and so forth.
This sounds very rosy and it's all nice, but it can't happen without finances. And I want to, Florence, to jump in, but the question is directed to you, and anyone else can jump in. And you rightly put it, I mean, it's the work of the media to break this down so that the common mwananchi can understand this. And we'll have reports, and reports are saying that developed countries committed at least 0.75% of their budget to help developed countries, developing countries, but it's a matter that has not really been realized. There's lack of commitment, and successful development programs are largely funded by donors. I mean, how will the SDGs then be realized with this kind of financial constraints, despite the promises that we have?
Well, I wanted to come in there last, but I can open up the conversation in that area. And I want to start with something that might sound controversial and say there is no lack of money. What we don't have is good ideas. Because even when you look at our banking sector, you'll find that our banking sector has more liquidity. It has more money than it is giving out. Internationally, if you scout and look at the world global financial markets, you'll be surprised. There's more money than investable projects. So what is important is for us, to have an environment that is good enough to attract the money. That's number one. And that's why in government we keep on talking about an enabling environment. Then number two is to understand and appreciate that which we want to do. And that then means crafting projects, crafting ideas in a way that we normally say bankable ideas. You know, something that makes sense. You show it to somebody and that person will say, I want to put in my money.
Professor, I saw you lifting up your finger.
Yes. I think I want to emphasize what Julius is saying. And I remember 2000 in Dakar, Senegal. The big five committed themselves to supporting the developing economies. But here's the biggest challenge we have is good projects. Indeed, money follows good projects. And you don't have to go far, Dennis. Look at what Kibwana has managed to bring, 18 million, because it's a good project. So I think we need to spend more time in good projects. The good thing is, our Vision 2030, SDGs, they all talking the same language. So if UNDP comes in to support, for example, SDG 3 or SDG 2, we're also looking at it from the perspective of Big Four, food and nutrition security. So we're actually addressing the same thing. And I think what is important, reflect back. If you go back to the time when Kemunya was this Minister for Finance, then there were ministers, 95% of our budget was being funded by the taxpayers.
So you do agree there's money, the problem is ideas.
Exactly. And then what Mwananchi, and that Wajiko will contribute that. I want to see the benefits out of that contribution after my taxes. And I think that's something we can tweet very easily in government and see the benefit. If you talk about 2M-Pesa, people will say, yes, I can see the child. If you talk about the last mile in terms of power, yes, I can see it. And I think what you're saying, those good projects, they might resonate well with the Mwananchi. And I can tell you the kind of sweat capital we have, the kind of hard capital we can talk about, is amazing in this country.
Florence.
Yes, I think I'll start from this, maybe just the non-state perspective. It's good to hear that there's good money in this country. And I think there's money. Okay, there's money in this country. Of course, that's just resources for implementation.
Correct.
Yeah, and I think the conversation needs to move from just believing that there's resources to actually seeing those resources being effective at a national level and at a county level. Because I think whatever the situation is right now is that when there's a lot of resources being allocated, but the issue of accountability is not there. The issue of allocation of budgets and what goes to the ground, what actually reaches the common mwananchi, is not being felt in many places. Of course, there's good progress, we are saying, but it's more about acceleration. How do we accelerate and ensure that Kenyan resources, and we're talking about maybe the domestic resources, how do we curb issues of illicit financial flows? When you talked about official development aid that comes from away out there, a lot of development work in Kenya so far is resourced by our donors, you know. So how, even with that, we're not saying that maybe that will not continue. Of course, that is set to continue. But how do we ensure that even our own domestic resources are used and used effectively for our own effective work? So issues of corruption, how do we ensure that even from a national perspective, from the county perspective, how do we hold our own leaders into account account the governors and all these people in leadership? How do we ensure that we understand the budgetary allocations and what is being used for all these different SDGs? I think that's how we need to move the conversation in terms of implementation.
I'm not quite sure. I don't think anybody here can tell us we had this, but we couldn't do it because of funds. I really ask her. It's just somebody who would actually tell us, we wanted to do this, but there were no funds. As long as that, what we wanted to do was something which is beneficial.
I think I'll give Honorable Pasaris a moment to make a comment on that in line with the question that I also want to throw at you, because we're talking about having this money, this government structure and all that, but we need to contextualize this and break it down. And it's at the point of bringing in the political context around this within which they're taking place in order for all this to be effective. And the question then will be, how do we ensure that the SDGs then are in alignment with the national agenda? We have the county plans, we have the Big Four agenda, we have the Vision 2030. I mean, they're all these national development plans.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I want the citizens to understand that in Parliament we have a caucus called the Kenya Parliamentary Caucus on SDGs and business. Now, the caucus is not funded by government. It's a caucus, we come together, we actually fund it from our own pockets. And this caucus, which about 30 members of Parliament belong to, right? We all do our parliamentary work in our various committees, we oversight. We feel that government should, knowing that they have Vision 2030, knowing that they're committed to the SDGs, they're committed to Agenda 2063, they've now got the four pillars of government. I feel that the government should actually embrace the caucus. In some countries, you find the caucus has actually been made a live committee with funding, so that when you're oversighting, you're looking that all the reports that are being given are pegged to the SDGs, all right? And I feel if they do that, then we can actually see exactly how we're performing. I mean, I know that Kenya presented the VNR report, and that was commendable. We came after Uganda, but we did it. I feel that somehow, you bring a report to Parliament, it's tabled, right? I think they needed to do more. Come and engage us as parliamentarians and take us through the entire report. Where were they getting all these answers? Because it'll be a shame if majority of whatever is contained in there came just from technocrats. Because we are the mheshimiwas on the ground, and some of the things that might be on the report are not exactly reflective of what's on the ground. So we need to have this kind of conversation so that we are all on board. We're all talking the same language. Now, when you think of the SDGs, how many Kenyans actually understand what is the SDGs? How many Kenyans actually understand what is Vision 2030? All right. How many Kenyans now? Today there was a poll that was done, and only 6 out of 10 Kenyans had never heard of the 4 pillars of government. So I feel that we need to not only be able to communicate, but also to fund that communication.
So are you saying that at Parliament's level, there's no synergy when these reports are being prepared, and therefore there's need to be involved and engaged during the process of making the reports and even submitting the reports?
You have to understand that when you look at parliamentarians, we are extremely busy with our various constituencies or counties. We are also extremely busy with our committees. All right. So when you come to and then, okay, there are some parliamentarians probably in the SDG caucus that never even managed to go when the report was being presented. So for me, I feel that when you have such a major report on the country's performance in relation to the SDGs, there is a need for us to have a forum like this where all the members of Parliament are brought on board. And every report that was contained in the VNR is shared with the members of Parliament, not just send us a document, let's discuss it. Let's actually say yes or no. Because I for one, I represent Nairobi. The VNR, I was not called and asked, oh, by the way, does this relate well to Nairobi? And is there anything you can add to this? So I feel that it was good that we presented it, but going forward, I think it's important that we engage. And right now, the caucus has about 30 members. But not every member of Parliament, all right? And this is not just Kenya, all over the world. We were in Berlin recently for the Partners Review. Even in Germany, not every member of Parliament will know of the SDGs because we get busy with our parliamentary work. And the SDGs is crucial. And for me, tying in the SDGs with Vision 2030 and seeing whether we are achieving Vision 2030 with the SDGs, with the monitoring, with the reporting, with the implementation, with the budgets, because once you engage Parliament, and if we became a full-fledged committee, then I know that we would be able then to actually call in the various ministries. This morning we were discussing it with Dr. Julius, and we were saying that every ministry should have an SDG desk. Every ministry, so that you can actually go in there and understand where is the ministry at with the SDGs. It's okay, every government plan, every budget, how is it performing with the SDGs? And I think there's an attempt to actually tie budget to SDGs, but I think the education, the knowledge, not just to the citizens, but also to the leadership is key.
I mean, Stephen, from the private sector point of view, you're dealing with these complexities. I mean, there's structural issues and all this. And for a long time, the private sector has always been known to, come in where they can profit and where they can get good publicity. And if they're to engage in any CSR, they will always go to the local mwananchi, common mwananchi, and if they're to offer anything, it will not be really decent jobs or different working environments. What's your commitment from the private sector when it comes to having this kind of debate, and you're engaging the executive, you're engaging parliamentarians, you're engaging all these people with all these complexities and structures, bearing in mind you have your own to deal with?
Dennis, I hear you about the complexity, but it really is simple for business. No business can succeed in a society that is failing. Okay, so it's simply a matter of self-interest. Education, when education is funded, when the youth are educated, it means you have the skilled manpower you need for a business. When healthcare is affordable, it means that your customers do not go bankrupt and have no disposable income to buy your products, and so on and so forth. And so sustainability is profitability, and that is simply the mantra for business. There are numerous examples of what business is currently doing in this regard. I want to highlight perhaps the most important, and that is adherence and commitment to the United Nations Global Compact 10 principles around human rights, labor, environment, and so on. And so here we see businesses committing to adopt a principles-based approach to SDGs. Very critical principles that at the very minimum enable you as a business to meet the most basic your responsibility for the planet, for the people, and for your own business, in terms of profitability. So it is true that, as has often been said, the business of business is business, but today, today it is actually more profitable to align yourself with the Sustainable Development Goals. As one CEO said in a forum, the goodwill of the market that you get from being a sustainable company is something that no marketing tool can buy. And that is precisely why business is so encouraged by such multi-stakeholder forums that seek to advance and secure the Sustainable Development Goals.
I have a question for Professor in line with what President Uhuru Kenyatta, his statement that was televised in South Africa. I'll come to that, but Dr. Terry has a point here before I go to Honorable Passaris for a question on Goal 11. Yes, sir.
Well, thank you, Dennis. I thought it's good for me to just say one thing and appreciate Esther Passaris here for what that group of 30 members of parliament who have formed that caucus on SDGs and businesses are doing. Because a lot of times it has not been very easy to interact with the legislature. But now we've got, from the current parliament, that caucus, which is good. I want to say last year when we were presenting that voluntary national report, that is when the elections were being held. And therefore, it was a transition period. But now going forward, we are going to work very, very closely with the members of parliament. And thank you. Then I want to add the point that we have a directorate under planning called Monitoring and Evaluation Department. And its work is to collect information about indicators on what is going on in the country and share those indicators in terms of monitoring and evaluation. So that information is available for the National Assembly, for the Senate, and for all mwananchi. So I think we'll engage with the caucus of the National Assembly so that we can share with them more information.
Well, that's a good promise, Honorable Passaris. You agree?
Yeah, it is. But I think the thing is, we really need to spend time together, right? So that we understand how they compiled the recent report that they presented, and going forward, what are they going to do in the next report? So that also we can participate. Because don't forget, I represent Nairobi. I can participate, and so can all the members of of the caucus participate in their various constituencies and counties, because that is the best way. If you want to disseminate any kind of information to the Mwananchi, you cannot neglect the elected leaders, because they actually are the ones that communicate to the citizens.
Can I just jump in there? And Mheshimiwa said they. That is what I want to avoid. I want us to say we.
We.
Because we are going to work on this together. We compile this information together. We tell Mwananchi together. And we share in the prosperity of having a very good framework of how we are implementing, monitoring, and evaluating SDG. So the operating word is we.
So we avoid the
Thank
word
you. No, thank you, Dennis. Now we've got a we going because of you. Now we've got a we going, and that's important. Yeah, and that's important. You were talking about goal number 11.
Goal number 11. And
Sustainable.
The question that I had for you, speaking of sustainable cities and communities, and it's basically pegged on improving living conditions for those people who are living in cities. And this obviously means that you have intelligent urban planning. Now, we now know that 60 to 70% of the world population will be living in cities in the coming decades. Now, as the women rep in Nairobi, what plan do you have looking at the most recent situation we had with the transport within Nairobi? And we don't seem to see a proper structure of the planning or even the issue of other stakeholders being involved. We are here as all stakeholders, but when we leave a room such as this one, we sort of have different people speaking from different standpoints, and we don't have everybody engaged in having one common voice.
You know, change is never easy, and change cannot be implemented without everybody on board. Okay? So, I mean, what we had recently with the traffic snarl up, refusing the matatus to come into the CBD, I mean, that also gave us an image of where we're failing. I mean, just seeing all the citizens walking into the CBD, they were walking on the road. That means we don't have enough pedestrian paths. That means we don't have enough cycle lanes. And I think when we're planning, we need to actually think about the fact that today this is the situation. We've got 4 million people in Nairobi, but in another 20 years, we might end up with 20 million people in the capital city. So we've got to think that far. I think Nairobi's public transport system requires a huge investment. All right. Now the question is already with the private sector, who are the custodians, who are giving us the taxes, right, are already feeling that the pinch and the burden is too much, because they're going to fund the housing starting from January, all right, and they're funding a lot of things, okay, and the fuel tax, you know, because the government needed to raise extra money. So I have a feeling that eventually we're going to have to really sit down and ask ourselves, what is a priority, all right, because much as we say we have money, right, we also have to tackle the big elephant in the room, which is corruption. Because we know that if we had taken the 30% or so they were saying we've lost in corruption, if we take that and we put it into sustainable cities and communities, we would actually be able to reduce the slums, would actually be able to provide water, put in the infrastructure for people to walk to work, people to cycle to work, because again, when you when you walk to work, we're protecting the environment. All right. Today, as I'm sitting here, I got to hear that there's demolitions going on in Toi Market. We're talking about decent jobs. As long as we don't have decent jobs as a sustainable goal, and people are actually earning their living through the kiosk or through hawking, and we're denying them that, then we're violating a human right, because we're denying them from earning an income. So I think it's important that we actually understand that we have too many people in the city of Nairobi that are trying to survive because somewhere along the line, devolution has not absorbed the people in their various counties. I keep saying that the majority of the people that are in Nairobi that are not working, how can we give them an incentive to go back to the rural areas, to actually get into the food security, to get into not only food security, but safe food, you know, and then make it profitable. And I know that Safaricom are coming up with a program where they will be giving you the seedlings, they'll be giving you, they'll be buying the produce from you. There's a lot of programs that are coming up. The question is now to have a coordinated effort so that we can actually end up building the sustainable cities. Because to build the sustainable cities, there's going to be, as we have seen, a few demolitions. There's going to be a bit of reorganization. Like look at Kibra, what happened in Kibra. To put the road there, we had to do away with quite a number of people lost their houses. But then again, They lost their houses, they were promised compensation, they never got compensation. So government has got to have a friendly approach to implementing what it wants for the people, because you can't destroy the people while implementing for the people.
I mean, Florence, and this is where I want you to come in. Speaking of approach, I mean, the Kenyan society has been known for a long time and has been accused of really focusing on personal betterment. When you have leaders who are coming in and they have those personal interests that override the national prosperity, so to speak, you have an issue where resources are channeled towards particular projects, and this is because an individual thinks this is better during my term. But how then do we build cohesion between personal interest when it comes to development to the SDGs that are basically long-term and will be here to stay beyond our stay in power, beyond the leaders' stay in power?
Yeah, that's a very good way to look at it, Dennis. Thank you. We believe that, for example, today, for the first time, coming together, this was never there before. Having government, having academia, private sector, parliament, civil society in one table and just coming together, coming up with a strategy that could move this conversation forward. The issue is there's been a lot of silo working and duplication of efforts, whereby a lot of resources are utilized, not just for what you find maybe the development partners investing in the same sort of investments where government is also investing. And therefore you find there's a lot of resources that fall to waste. And so coming together, for example, now gives us that opportunity for us to understand and to create partnerships in terms of understanding. If the government of Kenya is investing in, for example, in health facilities and other civil society are doing the same, how then do we coordinate that? And more, and just to sort of push it further in terms of the common mwananchi, how do we then, from this particular stakeholder, not just us who are sitting here, maybe because we maybe work for the different stakeholder departments, but how then do we ensure that this conversation really is from a citizen-driven perspective? Citizen-driven perspective, now that this is where we talk about the public participation. How then do citizens understand this is our role in terms of these are our elected leaders? When we elect leaders into power, it's not about them sitting in parliament or sitting in public offices and acquiring wealth for themselves. How do they understand that public offices are for the mwananchi? We are the ones electing them. And so I think the conversation of public participation and the investment of public participation needs to really take effect for the SDGs to be achieved. How then do we ensure that even those that have not been to school or those that are in the Juakali sector, for example, understand that for us within this county, this is the budget allocations, these are the places that I need to be in. For me, if something is not going well, I don't have access to water, I don't have access to health, there's an issue here and here. This is the process how for us to get this coming out.
I mean, before Honorable Pasaris jumps in, Professor, President Uhuru Kenyatta on Sunday delivered a televised speech, and I was at the FNB Stadium when he did that, and everyone in the stadium was really excited when he announced that he's going to commit and prioritize education and give 30% of the national budget towards education. Going with this, how are then universities playing a key role in the implementation of the SDGs? And can you be specific in giving examples where there has been support it can be from the point of research or from any other point? Is there tangible examples? Because we are seeing now a lot of money being pumped in, but do we then see the end results?
Okay, thanks, Dennis. I think I don't watch TV, so thanks for that information. But I read the paper.
And you're on TV right now.
Yes. And education is interesting because education is probably it's just you're investing, hoping the benefits will come down the road. So we have to be very careful in that mechanism in education. And probably, if I had him who invest more in the basic education, I'll be a happier person. My view, and I know I have a problem with my vice chancellor, there should be more funding to higher education. Because higher education can create opportunities to create resources. What am I saying? If you look perhaps even this process we are going, how many of us in academia, and this is a big challenge, and we're talking with Esther here, are engaged in terms of, for example, we take SDG 2, we take Agenda 4, the food and security. How almost more than, in 2040, the biggest crisis we'll be having is food insecurity. We do the simulations. But we are not engaged in that academia. And I think we, and I appreciate the word we need, the more palliative word we need to pick is we. So in terms of supporting basic education, I support the president. But if you're going to invest more in higher education, you missed it. It will never work. Liberia has gone to that, is having problems. South Africa has a problem. Eritrea has a problem. We meant that we cannot. What we need to do as academia is how do we, and Julius, we shared something very, very, very good with Julius this morning. How do we as academia, if I would take my sabbatical, I'm NCDG, I'm doing that one in government. That connection is not there. I do remember the late Makawiki, Professor Makawiki at Maseno University. How do we make a faculty, teaching faculty? After you teach for 3 years, the 4th year you must go out and work with the communities. We are talking of the farm in Kibwezi from the university, 500 acres. How do you use the irrigation they use in Israel? And we have that within our academia. So I think it's good, but the government, the universities can bring more money to the government. I've challenged my colleagues and my students, do a strategic plan. When Nairobi University will be giving Treasury money in the next 5 years. We have assets worth 13 billion, university. Actually, sorry, they are not assets anymore, they are liabilities. Because we are paying rates. We are paying the people to work, but we are not generating enough. So I think as academia, we need to shift our gears and see how we engage more in government. How do we actually tell government, in the next 20 years, this will happen? Let's prepare ourselves, the think tank of the country. We haven't got, and I think the point came, is you raised very well. And I think what we have in this country is what we call conspicuous consumption. We don't create wealth. Last year, we lost we have lost 550 billion to corruption. 550 billion. And that is in there, you can see it. So my point here is, we as academia, we don't have to be told by Julius, we don't have to be told by the civil society, but take that opportunity, get out there. Recently we had this discussion in the University of Nairobi, the IDS, Institute of Development Studies, and those are the engagement we want to bring to take this forward. Because at the end, I'll stop here perhaps. The Constitution was voted yes, because of those people who were educated by their parents. We educated our parents, we need to go back to them.
I will want to give the audience an opportunity to also field some questions, and we have a couple of questions coming in. But before they ask the questions, and as they prepare themselves to ask the questions, and I'll let Honorable Pasaris to make a remark. But Stephen, from the private sector, there's a lot of concern. We're losing a lot of money, and we're looking at, we have 17 goals, but the country has decided to focus on a few. And the few that we're looking at, for example, health, education, agriculture, and so on and so forth, are the ones that are greatly affected with corruption and all these scandals. As from the private sector perspective, which goals out of these 17 are of most concern to you?
All of them. I mean, what we're trying to discourage actually is SDG washing, where you find businesses select or repackage what they are doing as an SDG, and therefore there is no real progress. And so this is one of the things. So all of them interconnect. But you're right that the government, the Agenda 4, the Big Four agenda, of course, businesses often take their cue from government. Yes, occasionally businesses direct government business, but for the most part, government sets the agenda. You can see this by the Big Four. You'll see insurance companies are trying to figure out how they come into universal healthcare. Landlords and construction companies are trying to figure out how they come into housing, and so on. And so government has a real influence on business action. And what we want to encourage businesses to be more holistic in terms of SDGs. Yes, they connect. Certainly the Big Four agenda certainly connects to SDGs, but we would certainly hope it is more holistic. And you can see government is even appreciating that the Big Four is not enough, because just last week we had the Sustainable Blue Economy Conference, which is about SDG 14, life underwater, and so on and so forth. So we certainly need the government to set the cue, business to come in. But of course, business has its own challenges and its own opportunities. Short-termism in business is a big challenge for us. We are trying to get business to be more long-term oriented. And so I see a lot of raised hands probably triggered something.
And it's because you're mentioning government, and I know Dr. Julius here wants to respond on that. But have you finished your point, Stephen?
Yeah, sure, I'll comment. Yeah.
We'll start because it's talked about government and there's all this finger pointing at the government. You want to respond to that before I go to Honorable Pasaris?
Well, thank you, Dennis, for this opportunity. I want to clarify because what Steve has mentioned is the government has only picked 4 items and it's like it has forgotten the others. No. The point is that out of the very many frameworks of development sectors that the government is pushing, it has identified 4 which it's fast tracking. Now, those 4 are supported by enablers. The other enablers are all the other sectors within the Vision 2030 framework. And we have mapped out and made sure that what is in Vision 2030 is within the Sustainable Development Goals anyway. And so we have not forgotten the others. We have just said these 4, in the next 5 years, we are going to make sure that we push them very hard so that they can push forward the economy. So we haven't forgotten the others.
Haven't forgotten.
And I want to invite people to look at our medium-term plan 3, which is a big document that identifies exactly what the government is doing, because it's so clear, it's out there. Then I want to respond to another comment that was made earlier on about the many projects that government has and the question whether they're implemented properly and or not. When Vision 2030 was launched, it was very clear that all the funding of Vision 2030 projects will not come from government only. Over 70% of the funding will come from outside government. So I want to encourage Stephen and private sector, where I spent over 20 years before I joined government, to smell the coffee and look at where the profit opportunity is and look at the projects, because now we don't have white elephant projects like we used to have previously. All the projects that are there, the government is pushing to make sure that they are projects that are meaningful and they are implemented. And so there's a lot of opportunity for private sector.
All right, Honorable Pasaris, just very quickly, we don't have a lot of time and I really want the audience to jump into this conversation, but your remark.
I mean, if I have to think now as just a citizen, okay, I think we're aware that our government, right now, when you drive through the highways, even just driving to Naivasha, looking at all the infrastructural development, it's a plus. When you go to certain hospitals and you see that there's a scan, there's equipment, it's a plus. But then you don't find the doctors or you don't find the drugs because we put so much money into the equipment. And then you have equipment that is lying idle in certain places. And the containers that are in Mombasa were there for 2 years. All right, you've got Kenyatta University Hospital that has been sitting idle for over 2 years as well. So we have to actually sit down and ask ourselves, where are we going wrong? And why are we, because for me, Kenyatta University Hospital is almost like a white elephant, because how do you have such a latest state-of-the-art facility sitting idle when you don't have beds for ICU available in Kenyatta? So I have a feeling, I think we need to start having action. And Botswana has a Ministry of Poverty Eradication, a whole ministry dedicated to that. We need a Ministry of Poverty Eradication, and we also need a Ministry of Stalled and Failed Projects. Okay? If we have a Ministry of Stalled and Failed Projects, then we start working on them. And then, because, this is money. These are resources. And then I think China. We know that we have limited resources as a country. Private sector, I was in the Netherlands. Netherlands are taxed over 60%. They don't have a problem because they actually are so proud of their country.
And they see value for the taxes.
They don't have a problem. They see the value. We don't see the value, and the headlines are corruption, corruption, corruption. If I was President Uhuru Kenyatta, I would get all the principals in one room. All the principals. Get them to get all their 100 best friends who've made money out of this country. Okay? And the money obviously was not made doing straight deals. Get them into a room, and then we sit down and we talk. Because I'm always thinking, the 44th tribe of Kenya, the amount of work that they do for this country, what is the rest of the 43 tribes doing for Kenya? Because they are also the billionaires of today. We have them there. Let us write, even private sector, I know we need to make profits, but I think we have to have an approach for Kenya that if we really want to have zero poverty, how do we actually come together and do good? But the private sector is exhausted seeing the headlines on corruption. But the private sector is also party to the corruption. All right? So for me, I look at Kenya and I feel something's got to give. And the one thing that will help us achieve the 17 sustainable goals is we need to family plan. We are having too many children. All right? And we cannot afford the number of children we're having. Linda Mama is fine. It was about reproductive health. But it wasn't about having children that you cannot afford to feed. It wasn't about, you have a woman, I'm dealing with women who have 9 children. The husband doesn't have a job, the wife doesn't have a job, they have 9 children. They come to Mheshimiwa, I want bursaries, and she's planning the next pregnancy. I really think, in the 60s, Tom Mboya was asked, what are your plans for the country now that you've got independence? He said, we have to plan our families in line with our resources. All right? In the 70s, Kibaki was asked the same question, being a staunch Catholic. He said family planning was key. I want to understand from Dr. Julius here, what is planning, thinking, and talking in terms of family planning? Because the 17 sustainable goals, no matter how much resources we have, will never be attained if we do not plan our families.
I'll give Dr. Ari a chance to respond to that. It's a very, very important issue you've raised, and it goes in line with Goal 11, and you're thinking of intelligent planning for urban cities and also our rural areas. What are we looking at? But I want to throw this to the audience. We have less than 10 minutes to do this, so I don't know from which direction we'll get this question from. We have a question from there, and please just make your question very brief. State your name and where you're coming from.
Thank you, and I want just to thank the panelists for the discussion going on. I'm Frederick Owuor, I work for VSO Kenya. And talking about multi-stakeholder and knowing that there are people outside here who are also interested in this discussion, we need to develop a common understanding. But my question will be, what is Kenya's idea of a shared value? Because for us to have a common understanding, we must also share in that value. And considering how diverse and divided we tend to be as a nation, and the next question will be, how will the implementation of SDG be different in bringing a shared value to our citizens? Thank you.
Well, thank you for that question. I think we can get a second one, and then as they take the questions down, they will respond to them.
Thank you very much. My name is Mudhoni Kiari. I work for the State Department of Industrialization. And my question is that the Big Four agenda on manufacturing is not achievable under the current high taxation on both profit and every value addition to a product. So we're wondering what the government would do not to kill the manufacturing sector, because they are even before they take off. KRA, they are on their case, and we find that some, the ones who come from outside the country, they are given like 5 years to take off. So we're wondering if even the local manufacturers can be given the same. Thank you.
Third question, before I throw it to the panel.
Okay, thank you. My question goes to the peers.
Your name, please.
Sorry, my name is Jennifer. My question goes to the peers. 54% of this nation are considered below the age of 18 years. So, and I think all the goals affect children, but what is your plan as a department to involve children in this particular plan that we are developing here today, and also in the dissemination? Do we have a child-friendly version of the SDGs? Are they in Swahili or in Kimeru or Kitaita, so that these children, because they are the holders, in 2030 some of us will be retired, but they're the ones who are going to push the vision ahead. So what are we doing about that? Thank you.
I think we can start with the last question that Jennifer has asked the PS, and then we can go all the way to Mudhoni, who had asked the other question, and then the issue of the shared values and how the SDGs will come in and how they will affect, or how they will affect the shared values that we share. I'll start with you, PS.
Well, thank you, Dennis. I like the questions that are coming through, because it means that people are awake and are alive to what we are discussing. So starting with the last question about the children and how we are engaging, and I want to say, we are discussing that now. So this is one of the forums where we can come up with a very clever and robust engagement framework where we say, because these are the demographic structures in our country, this is the way we want to go ahead. Having also said that in the medium-term plan 3, we have very elaborate frameworks in the way we want to share our development thinking for our country, but then again, let us enrich it with our engagement here. Going back to the question about population and what Mheshimiwa here said, let me deal with all the questions straight away. The question about family size and what we are doing. One of the things that we have found as we are looking at planning through one of the institutions called the National Council of Population and Development is that education is a game changer. If you give people education, the question about family planning and how many children have, that will be solved. Poverty also, in terms of how much money you have, is also an indicator and a big parameter in determining the family size. So when we are talking about education, talking about prosperity, and also doing away with poverty, we are dealing with the size of the family indirectly. Question about shared values. I want to refer my colleague and my friend there to Article 10 of the National Constitution, because it spells out clearly the 17 principles of national values and principles of governance. And those are the shared values for Kenyans. I want to refer him to Article 232 1D, which refers to the way then we are supposed to consult around when we are doing things in the public service. And I want also to refer him to, and everybody here, to a policy that was developed and adopted by Cabinet in 2012 on national values and principles of governance. It spells out completely what we are supposed to do as a country and as a government. Modoni, the question you have asked about taxation, that is something that I think within government we should be tackling, because as we are looking at the Big Four agenda and manufacturing being a very important one, we must make sure that we remove all the barriers that the indigenous, domestic, and local businesses face as they are developing from small startups to scale.
I think apart from the question that Jennifer asked Bwana PS directly, anyone can jump into the other questions from Muthoni and the issue about shared values. I'll start with you, Honorable Pasaris.
Okay, I mean, for me, shared values, when I go into the informal settlements and I look at the dwellers there, I'll tell you the one value that they all share is absolute hard work. Absolute hard work. Kenyans are very hardworking given the opportunity, all right? But the problem is the opportunities that the Kenyans in the informal settlements are getting, it's not from the government. They're getting, the government is harassing them, going and breaking kiosks, breaking houses, you doing whatever. Okay, the opportunities they're getting are from the donors. If you look at every successful project with the CBO or self-help group, right, majority of them are donor funded, addressing our social issues, all right? Now that we have NGAF, and unfortunately the women reps were given very little money. NGAF is like a grant, the same way donor money comes in. But we're given so little money that in one constituency, I have only 6.5 million for the entire year. It is too little to actually impact in the same manner as the donors. Now, when we talk about family planning, I disagree that it's about education. It's about commodities. I mean, you can tell me, Esther, if you take this pill, right, for 21 days, you will not have a baby. That's fine. But if you don't provide me the pill, hello, the education was good, but I'm still going to get pregnant. Okay? So we actually have to have the commodities, and majority of the commodities are provided, again, by donors. So I honestly feel that we have, hard work is one of our values. The value that we don't have, that we need to develop, which has led to corruption, is honesty. We need to be honest. We have so many churches, but we have lost the integrity of honesty. And then the next value is the handshake. So I'm giving you the 3 H's for me in terms of value. It's the handshake. The handshake that says we're all equal and we should all have the same opportunities, but that handshake has to embrace every community of this country. It can't be about 2 communities. It has to be about every community if we have to be honest.
Professor Wanene.
Yeah, I think there's something I want perhaps to make clear. And I think I would like us to leave here. Let's stop calling poverty eradication. I think it's negative. Why can't we think about wealth creation? The things we are going to do, they are going to create wealth. When you keep on, and every donor left and right, poverty eradication. Let's go to Kibera. How do we create wealth within those people? It's positive. Now, the issue of family planning, I agree with you, my sister. You know, we can talk until the cows come home. Let's go the China way.
One child.
And we penalize you for having that. We're penalizing you for that having another child.
It's true.
It touches you, it feels you. And we go that because they managed. And it's correct. If I give you an example today, if you look at the population growth in this country, and you look at the food production in 2030, the gap is wide. So it can't work. Now, the issue then, I think that's making it. The other issue, and I'm happy that you are raising it from the ministry. I think the issue of taxation, Julius, is important. If we are going to encourage people to invest, and by the way, Kenya, we are the third in Africa with FDIs, but there is more with domestic. You look at RBA, you look pension, they have over 3 trillion. They are not mobilizing those resources. So in terms of manufacturing, and I am as a manufacturer, I'm looking for one thing, and one thing only, predictable environment. Because this is you go to Malaysia, 10, 12, they call it grantee, bill of grantee, 12 things. If you come, there's no taxation on this machinery. And I think that's what we step back. So as an investor in manufacturing, the big four, there's one thing I want to talk about, food security. If I was the president, and God forbid, if I was the president, and I don't have money, I'll do one. I'll feed my people with sufficient nutritional food. That's medicine. Food is medicine. They'll take kids to school. They'll do everything else. And I think when Julius pointed this in before you people came, he linked up to about 6 SDGs. And I think what we need to do, and I agree with you, let's not make it a talk show. If you want us to change the issue of corruption, the leadership must be strong. No nonsense kind of a leadership. A leadership, you tell, if you go to Malaysia carrying drugs, they'll kill you. And they'll kill you.
I want to bring in Florence because there are quite a number of things that have come up from this conversation. I mean, there's the issue of family planning, the issues, of course, of human rights involved. I mean, China has been very, very controversial with this. I mean, there's the issue of corruption, there's the issue of taxation, there's also the issue of the shared values like they're asking. From a civil society point of view, how do you condense all these issues and make sense out of all this and have some form of direction in line, of course, with SDGs?
Thank you, Dennis. I believe, maybe just to quickly react to Professor's comments, I strongly believe that even with the population as it is in this country, we still have opportunities to be able to give our people.
She must be a Catholic. Go ahead.
Yeah, but the point is, I believe that we have the resources to ensure, for example, from goal 1 to 5, which are basic needs. When you look at the MDGs, goal 1 to 5 is a condensation of the MDGs, what was there within the MDGs. We're still talking about people not being able to have food on the table. We're talking about issues of, access to health and so forth. So we need to first and foremost as a country agree that we are able to do this for our own people. This means that when we talk about issues of corruption and the illicit financial flows, how then do we ensure that this translates to each and every day the Mwananchi getting access to that which they need to access? Because that needs to be our priority as a country. Because the issue about now all of us, the shared principles, for me, from the civil society perspective, for us, what we are up for or what we are really pushing for is the delivery as one. Whereby, as we said before, this has not been the case for many years, where development, even from independence, it's always from a sectoral position. So how then do we come together? And then it's again, maybe just even from the media perspective, we see so much politician talks, priority given to, just the political and content that is not very, maybe sometimes very progressive for this country. How do we change that, even from a media perspective, and also the different stakeholders? For us, is coming together, understanding, having very clear ways where even citizens from whichever county or whichever corner of this country can be able to know, this is my priority, this is how I can do it, and this is, for me, a place where I can bring innovation and things that citizens want to bring forward.
I mean, I want to allow Stephen also to jump in. And Professor, if you can pass your mic over to Stephen to just make a comment on the issue of shared values. There's also the issue of taxation.
It's also sharing.
And you're sharing the microphone as well. And there's also this, the issues that have arisen here. We're talking about population, we're talking about corruption. What are the concerns as private sector? I know you're in business, but then also in line with answering the questions that the audience were asking, Stephen.
On shared value, business is increasingly recognizing that what we do as individuals, individual persons, individual businesses, often matters less than what we do as a collective. Which is why in 2016, business came together and initiated the Bribery Act 2016 to address corruption on the supply side. A lot of businesses have signed on to the Code of Ethics for Business in Kenya, committing themselves to fight corruption. On engaging children, the Global Compact worked last year, I believe, with Save the Children and UNICEF to develop child rights and business principles that directly address how businesses impact on children's lives in the workplace, in the community, and in the marketplace, and so on and so forth. The examples are numerous. Of course, the numbers are nowhere near where we want them to be, and this is the challenge. Business accepts that, we are not yet at the critical mass of business engagement that can really drive the SDG agenda to a point of no return, that we can get enough momentum to get to a point of no return. And so all these commitments, for instance, that businesses have taken, women empowerment principles that businesses are committing to, United Nations guiding principles on business and human rights that businesses have committed to. We are actually developing here in Kenya Africa's first national action plan on business and human rights. And so there is a lot of business engagement, but the numbers, all these engagements total about 800 businesses that have committed to all this engagement. SMEs alone number, in the millions. SMEs alone. And so the numbers are nowhere near the critical mass we need to get. We don't need to get to a majority, we just need to get to a point where we can get enough momentum to lift off and materially affect the success of SDGs.
I mean, we'll want to wind up this in a few minutes, but there are two questions that came from the audience, and I'll just throw this across the panel for anyone to jump in. Kenya's population is 60% young people. What is the youth agenda in relation to SDGs? Question one. Question two, over 60% of the SDG agenda implementation is about policy reform and policy coherence. Considering Kenya isn't known for implementing policies, what assurance do we give or do we have on SDGs? And I think I'd want to start from our PS here, Dr. Julius, as we go across, as we wind up with our closing remarks.
Well, yeah, great, thanks. This question about the youth agenda, I agree it is a big one because, again, it is not just Kenya alone. There is the question about the youth bulge, which is everywhere in the world currently, which is a big topical issue. And for us, actually, is to ask ourselves how we can turn this on its head and then look at what is called the youth dividend. How can we have benefits that are going to be related to the population, structure that dividend? And first of all, in Vision 2030, we have a sector that deals with the youth. Again, if you look at the way our medium-term plan 3 has been structured, there is a lot of emphasis on giving skills to the youth. Because a lot of times, the youth have failed to get something that is gainful employment or even get into entrepreneurship because they have not been given the right skills, having gone through the formal academic route that a lot of us took. And so there is emphasis, there is focus in terms of the youth. But I also want to say that, and this is what I said earlier on about a monitoring and evaluation structure. We've got a monitoring and evaluation structure in the government that is picking and making sure that we identify what has been done, what has not been done, and the corrective action is taken. And that is where we have got performance contracting framework in government so that every 3 months, every ministry, department, or agency reports on what they have done in terms of the things that they're committed to do. So in terms of the youth, we are doing something. But allow me, Dennis, just to touch on something very quickly about our level of development as a country. By 2008, when we were formulating Vision 2030 and launching it, we were a low-income economy. Having implemented Vision 2030 by 2014, we migrated and graduated into middle-income status. But then the lower level, which is lower middle income. By 2030, we should be upper middle income. A country that is upper middle income is a net giver of development aid. And so the reliance on support from outside, which Mheshimiwa talked about, donors coming and helping us, that is going to be history going forward. So I want us to think about a mindset where we are net givers of support to outsiders. Because in our house, in our country, we are going to have to be sufficient because Vision 2030 has pronounced that, and watch this space, we are going there. Thank you.
I know, Esther, you want to jump into what he has said, but because we're really, really pressed with time, I just want you to quickly run through the issue of the youth, like the audience has asked. 60%, the focus is on the youth, the issue about reforms, change of policy and all that.
The youth is a time bomb waiting to explode. I think we need to absolutely understand that we never planned well for the youth. They're frustrated, they're high on drugs, they're high on crime, and we cannot kill all our youth. I have a youth that is from Raraka. He's recently moved to Kibra. And he called me and he says, Mom, I really need a job. I need something to do, all right? Because I don't want to die like all my friends. And he admits to me. He says, yes, I was a thug. I was stealing. But what else could I do? There was nothing else. So we have to understand the drug addicts that we have that are going through the methadone program in Madare, they're also looking for a way to be sustained. I think it's important that as a government, we literally talk family planning, and then we literally start to look at our youth with a view to shaping them, okay? And for me, my suggestion to the government is take all these funds, merge them into one, put them under the women rep's office, and let the women rep work with the youth. Because Uwezo has been given to the same MPs. You know, you've got a youth enterprise, you've got women enterprise. Let's merge the funds so that we can actually go out there and set the youth up. Let's involve the youth in the 4 pillars. How do we get the youth into housing? How do we get the youth into health? We need more doctors, we need more nurses. Do we have the youth that have finished Form 4 that never went to university? Can we take them to college and give them free scholarships to fill that gap? Can we talk to the Middle East? Middle East is employing a lot of Indians, a lot of Filipinos, a lot of Asians. As far as I'm concerned, we have a market there that we can tap. So how can we train our people and give them good work ethics? Because the way politics has done to our youth is handouts. That handouts culture has made the youth see a Mheshimiwa as Mheshimiwa. Oh, I need rent. I don't have money to pay rent. I mean, this is not the way you're supposed to have a relationship with your leader.
So you're saying we need to involve them in something that is meaningful.
I think we need, our census will tell us exactly where we are, but for right now, our youth are in a dangerous place, and we as the citizens that actually think we have a lot, the youth are coming for us.
Thank you so much, Mheshimiwa. Because of time, in 10 seconds,
Okay,
Professor, I know this is hard, but
I think I don't want to be that much in front of the youth. I think it's important. It's an opportunity to leverage on the youth. I want to talk about policy. Policy is a very difficult animal. If you are going to talk about innovation, you can't have policy. Innovation and policy, they don't go together. Innovation happens every day. Policy doesn't happen every day. At times we hide so much in policy. Just implement what is good. I think that's important. And I want to stress the academia, very important in terms of providing the best data, better policies, better lives for the state. I wish you guys can take more addressing the animal we have in this country. You came out very well. Please push it, the issue of corruption, and let's push also in terms of reaching our people. We have that responsibility. This forum is the best opportunity we have to talk to our people, coming together and see ourselves as we.
Florence, quickly.
Thank you. The SDGs will not be achieved if the youth are not at the key front of implementation, monitoring, and review. It's unfortunate that Kenya, for many years, we've not seen the value of having the youth at the forefront of this particular country's development agenda. There's a lot of talk that has gone on about the key critical areas of youth engagement, but I think it's time for us to really act to ensure that, for example, the Big Four, we need to see a plan. What's the plan within the Big Four for the youth to be in the forefront in terms of manufacturing, in terms of issues of decent work, in terms of food security, and so forth. So for us here, I think we need to call forth, not just in terms of the talk, we need to see practical ways within the ministry, within the different stakeholders, and more importantly, civil society really works a lot with youth within communities. How then can we do that?
Okay. Stephen, in 10 seconds.
To quote someone I can't remember, we hold this planet in trust for our children. And the youth have the most agency, I think, to affect businesses to be more sustainable. Youth are customers, they're employees, and so on. I think you've seen what is happening on Google. Basically, the employees have forced the company not to enter into China because of human rights concerns, and so on and so forth. 60% of millennials say they will happily buy a product that is more expensive as long as the company is sustainable, and so on and so forth. So the youth are central to pressuring businesses to adopt sustainability and responsibility.
Well, thank you very, very, very much. I mean, a round of applause for our panel. We've had a very interesting debate. We are stopping our live coverage from this point on, but the conversation continues after we go off air. We've had Principal Secretary, State Department for Planning, Dr. Julius Muya, also from the Parliamentary SDGs and Business Caucus, Honorable Esther Passaris, who's also the Nairobi County Women Rep, Civil Society, Ms. Florence Sievo, I got it correct? Yes, SDGs Kenya Forum. We also heard from the academia, Professor Gituro Wainaina from the University of Nairobi. Also from the private sector, Mr. Stephen Wainaina, UN Global Combat Kenya. Thank you so much for your time.